Hello everyone, today we are talking about negative powers of 10, but before we can get into that, we have to remind ourselves what an exponent is. So remember, an exponent tells us how many times a number is multiplied by itself. So if I have something like 2 to the third power, I'm taking that 2 and I'm multiplying it 2 times 2 times 2 3 times because that's what the exponent tells us to do. Now, when we start looking at the whole power over here, remember that our big number that we're multiplying over and over again is called our base. And the small number that tells us how many times to do that is called the exponent. And then all together, that's called a power. Now, you'll really commonly see us refer to two different forms that we write these powers of 10. Our expanded form is going to be that where you see the multiplication over and over again. And then our standard form is going to be the normal number, fraction, or decimal. Now, in a positive power of 10 like this, 10 to the third, we're taking that 10 times 10 times 10. But today we're focusing on negative powers of 10. So instead of 10 to the third, you might see something like 10 to the negative 3. So instead of multiplying 10 times 10 times 10, we're actually going to be multiplying 1/10 times itself over and over and over. Now, some tips and tricks. Powers of 10 are always going to be written as a bunch of zeros and ones. You can see this. It's a bunch of ones and zeros, right? The only numbers that are going to be not zero are going to be those exponents. So that can help us in some multiple choice questions we'll see later. The other important rule, my little head is floating over right now, is that negative numbers do not mean a negative exponents do not mean a negative number. So we'll see these negative exponents, but our answers are never going to be negative. We're not going to have negative 1,000 or negative 1/100th. They're always going to be positive. That negative exponent simply means it's a really small number, so it's always going to be a number between 0 and 1. Let's take a look at this table to kind of look for some patterns and see how we can use that to our advantage. So, looking up at the top, starting with those positive powers like we said, 10 to the fourth is 10 times 10 times 10 times 10, 4 times, and when we multiply that all out, we get 10,000. So same thing, 10 to the third, 10 times 10 times 10 is going to be 1,000. And as you could probably guess, 10 to the second power is going to be 10 times 10, or 100. And our finally 10 to the 1 is just 110 by itself, so just 10, which stays 10. Now here is that tricky 10 to the 0. Now everyone always wants to make it, or it feels like it should be 0, right? But we're going to look at our pattern. So if we're looking at this, we have 4 tens, then 3 tens, then 2 tens, then 1 tens, right? So we're in 4, 3, 2, 1. And also we can look at the same number of zeros, right? There's 4 zeros, then 3 zeros, then 2 zeros, then 1 zero. So 10 to the 0 power is kind of like 1 with 0 zeros. And so it's just 1. So we're just getting rid of that 0. Okay, now we get into the fun part of our negative exponents. So 10 to the negative 1, now we're not multiplying 10 anymore, we're multiplying 1/10. So 1/10 as a fraction is just like that. And remember that the fancy way to read this 0.1 is really 1/10 because that 1 is in that tenths place. We can keep going. So 10 to the negative 2, 1/10 times 1/10, and 1 over 10 times 10 is the same as 1 over 100. And again, this 0.01, that 1 is in the hundredths place. So we'd read that as 1/100th. Pause the video here and see if you can fill out 10 to the negative 3 and 10 to the negative 4 on your own. All right, let's see how you did. So 10 to the negative third is our 3/10, 1 over 1,000, or 1/1000th. And 10 to the negative fourth is going to be that 4 1/10, 1 over 10,000, or 1/10,000. All right, last but not least, let's take a look at what you might see on a test with some multiple choice questions. So our first one, we want to select all the following that are equivalent or equal to 10 to the negative third. Now remember, the big important rule is that a negative exponent does not mean a negative number. So test taking strategy, you want to get rid of all those negatives first. Another strategy, remember, is that it's always going to be a bunch of ones and zeros except for that exponent. So this a, 1 over 30, is not going to be in that correct form. Now, if we look at D, E, and F, these are all correct. So 10 to the negative third would be 1/1000th, right, with those 3 zeros. 1 over 1,000, 10 times 10 times 10, and 1/10 times 1/10 times 1/10. So these are all correct. They're all written in that fraction or decimal form. So the answer to number 1 would be D, E, and F. Now, pause the video here again, and I want you to try this number 2 as soon as I move my little face out of the way. Okay, let's see how you did. Hopefully we didn't trick you too much with this one. So this time we're looking for everything equivalent to 10 to the negative fifth. Now remember, first thing, negative exponents do not mean a negative number, so we can automatically cross out that D. Also, we know that we're looking for that 1/10 times 1/10 5 times, which is exactly what that A is, that 1 over 100,000. B, just 100,000. This would actually be the answer if we had 10 to the positive 5, if we were multiplying just that 10 times 10 over and over again. But unfortunately, we are not doing that this time. Now, C is another way to write these powers of 10 we haven't talked about quite a lot yet, but we can always write them as that 1 over that 10 to the 5th, because remember we talked about that 10 to the 5th is really this 10,000, and our real answer is really that 1 over 100,000. So this is the correct way to write that. E is showing you the incorrect way to do that. So when we bring that exponent to the bottom, to the denominator, we have to get rid of that negative exponent. The negative exponent is only going to be written up here when we have that big base and that smaller exponent there. So that is our powers of 10. I hope you are feeling confident and go on to rock it. So have a wonderful day, and I will see you next time.